Hi, and welcome back to English Lessons with Stephanie. This is writing and vocabulary lesson number 7. Here's our vocabulary set for today. We've got 16 vocabulary words plus 3 phrasal verbs. Our first word is horrify. Horrify is a transitive verb that means to cause shock and disgust. So in this story, we said he was horrified to see that Chris had an obvious drug problem. That means he was really shocked and saddened and disgusted to see that he had developed a drug problem. We can see that horrify has a complete word family. So the non-count noun form is horror. Horror is the feeling of shock and disgust. And we also use the noun horror as a feeling of extreme fear. So we talk about horror films. Those are films that make us really scared and terrify and disgust us. Next, we have 3 different adjective forms. We have horrific and horrifying, which are both causes. So if something is horrific or horrifying, it causes us to feel horrified, the effect. And then an adverb, horrifyingly. So in our second example here, it says the horrific war killed thousands of innocent people. Right, so that's an adjective describing the war. And in the third example, the child horrified her parents when she said a bad word. That's a verb, the past tense verb. She horrified her parents. That means she made them really shocked. She shocked them. And you'll see that in the past tense, we have to change the Y to an I before we add the ED because there is an F before the Y, and F is a consonant. Our next word is devastate. Devastate is a transitive verb that means to damage something very badly or to ruin it completely. So in the story, I said I was devastated to learn of Chris's problem. That means I was emotionally damaged. It really hurt me. I felt so sad and so upset. The noun form is devastation, and this is a non-count noun. That means the damage that is caused is called devastation. There are 2 adjective forms. Devastating is the cause, and devastated is the effect. And then the adverb form, devastatingly. So in our second example, we see the verb form. The tornado devastated the small town. That means it caused a lot of damage to the small town. And in the last example, we have the adjective form, the cause. The devastating disease almost killed her. Our next word is desperate. Desperate is an adjective that means needing help very badly. So we use this word to describe someone who is in a very bad situation. So if I say I am desperate, that means I am in a very troubling situation, a crisis, and I need your help. So in this story, we said suddenly his desperate and sporadic phone calls made sense. So here desperate is describing the phone calls. That means when he is making these phone calls, we can hear that he needs something and he needs help. In the second example, we have desperation as the noun form. Her desperation to feed her children caused her to rob the store. So remember, rob is one of our verbs from last week that means to steal things. So if you are in a terrible situation and you need help, maybe that would cause you to steal things. And finally, we have the adverb form desperately. I desperately need your advice. Please help me. Desperately is one of the adverbs that we use a lot to mean really strongly. So if I desperately need your advice, that means I really, really need it in a way that will help me because I'm in a desperate situation. Next, we have a phrase, make sense. So if something makes sense, that means it's logical or easy to understand. So when we said, suddenly his desperate and sporadic phone calls made sense, we use this phrase because the phone calls at first were confusing. We didn't understand the phone calls. Once we understood that he had a drug problem, then the phone calls were easier to understand. So it was easier to understand why he was acting that way and why his phone calls were so crazy. The second example says, the answer to this physics problem doesn't make sense. We must have made a mistake. So we can use make sense for larger topics in math and science as well. And then in our last example, it says, it makes sense to study English if you want to live in America. So here's another example that shows us how it is logical to study English. This last sense means it's more of a logical situation. So it is logical to study English if you want to live in America. So the past tense of make, this is made. This is an irregular verb. So we would say made sense. And the past participle is also made. Our next word is insist, which can be used in an intransitive or transitive form. And insist means to repeat something to get your way, to get what you want. So in the story, Chris insisted that he was trying to get better. That means he says it again and again, that he's trying to get better, that he's trying to improve. And the reason why someone would insist is because you don't believe them. So if I insist I'm telling the truth, that means you think I'm lying, so I have to repeat myself. I'm telling the truth. I'm telling the truth. We have a complete word family here. So insistence is the noun form. The adjective form is insistent. And the adverb form is insistently. And in the other column, I wrote insist on plus an ing verb, because when you want to use insist with another verb, we have to use the preposition on plus an ing verb. So, for example, the last example here said she insisted on paying for my lunch. So that means I say, oh, I will pay for my lunch. And she says, no, I will. Please let me pay. And we might fight or argue about it for a minute, but in the end, she will pay for the lunch because she repeats it again and again, that she wants to do it. So instead of saying she insisted to pay, we will say she insisted on paying for something. She insisted on doing that. And in the second example, we see insistence used as a non-count noun. So that's the act of insisting. At his insistence, I read that book, but I didn't like it. That means he said again and again, you should read that book. And so finally, I agreed to read it, but I didn't like it. Next, we have a transitive verb, doubt. Now, notice that when you pronounce this word doubt, the B is silent. So we don't say doubt, we just say doubt, like there's no B. So doubt means that you don't believe someone. Maybe you believe them a little bit, but there is part of you that doesn't believe them. So in the story, I said I began to doubt some of his stories. That means you don't really believe that the stories are true. Doubt can also be used as a countable or a non-count noun. So a countable doubt is like a single thought you have. And non-count doubt is just the action of having doubt. We have two adjective forms. Dubious is the cause and doubtful is the effect. So if someone tells you a story that you doubt, you feel doubtful, and the story is dubious, right? She told me a dubious story. So in our last example, Cheyenne is doubtful that her sister can change her ways. That means Cheyenne has doubts. She doesn't really believe that her sister can change her behavior. Our next word is gullible, which is an adjective. And gullible is a very specific word that means easy to trick or fool or cheat someone. Another way to explain it would be a gullible person will believe almost anything. So in the story, I said, I felt gullible for not realizing what had been happening. That means that he told me all these stories and I just believed his stories. So I was gullible. I just believed everything. Like in our next example, he's so gullible, he'll believe anything I tell him. So gullibility would be the non-count noun form, but it's most often used as an adjective. Our next word is familiar. Familiar is an adjective that means known, something that you already know. In the reading, we said, I felt a familiar mix of nostalgia and rage. That means this feeling that we had was something that we felt comfortable with, like we already knew about it. We have a complete word family for familiar. Familiarity is a non-count noun. Familiarize is a transitive verb that means to make yourself familiar with something. There is an adverb form that's not commonly used. And in the last column here, the other column, you'll notice that we use two different prepositions with familiar. You are familiar with something, or something is familiar to you. So we say with when we're talking about the subject and to for the person. So for example, the second one said she needed to ask for directions since she wasn't familiar with the city. Or it could also say she needed to ask for directions because the city wasn't familiar to her. And in the last example, we have the verb form. You should familiarize yourself with the software. It will help you to do your job. The next word is a noun, mix, which is a countable noun. It's more than one thing put together, or a combination or a blend. Those are two other words that mean similar things. So like the previous example, I felt a familiar mix of nostalgia and rage. That means these two feelings, these two very different feelings, mixed together, put together. There are many ways to use mix as a verb. We can use mix as an intransitive or transitive verb. So the second example shows it used as an intransitive verb. Oil and water don't mix very well. We could also use it as a transitive verb and say, you can mix oil and water. Mix up is also used, which is our phrasal verb. And here's an example in the last sentence. I often mix up there, and there. And here, mix up means to confuse. Then the adjective forms, we have mixed or mixed up, or they are mixed up. That means it could be confused or things are mixed together. If you're cooking an omelet, you can mix up eggs with some milk or some cheese. And notice that when you want to mix two things together, you use the preposition with. So mix oil or mix eggs with cheese. Next, we have a verb, bother, an intransitive verb, which means to make an effort. There are two different meanings of bother. So this one, the other one is annoy, but this one means to make an effort. In the story, we said he hadn't even bothered to call me. Another example is don't bother asking her. She won't know the answer. So it's like don't make the effort to ask her because she won't know. And the last one is I didn't bother to clean the house before the guests came over for dinner. So this is showing like a lack of effort. Next, we have a phrase, to lose one's mind. And this means to go crazy or to not be able to think straight, to be very stressed or very emotional. So in the story I said, after my mother died, I almost lost my mind with grief and stress. So that's like emotional craziness. Or you could say, if I don't get a vacation soon, I'm going to lose my mind. So that's very informal, not so serious. Or in the last example, you spend all that money on a bottle of wine. Have you lost your mind? That's very common to say to someone like, have you lost your mind? Like, are you crazy? And remember that lose is an irregular verb, so the past tense of lose is lost. Grief is a non-countable noun because it's an emotion. It is extreme sadness, usually because of a loss. So in the story, grief is grief because of a death. But you can also experience grief after losing a job or losing a friend. The verb has two forms, as an intransitive or a transitive verb, so you can grieve something. You can say, I grieved my friend. That means you grieve the loss of your friend. Or you can just say, after I lost my friend, I grieved, period. Our next word is counselor, which is a person who counsels, who gives advice. Counsel can also be a non-count noun, which is the advice that a counselor gives. And counsel can also be used as a transitive verb, which means to give advice. So in the reading, we said, I tried to be his friend, his counselor, and his savior. But in the second example, a college counselor is someone who gives students advice on how to get into college. And in the third example, she counseled me about business ideas. That means she gave me some advice about business ideas. Struggle is an intransitive verb, and it means to fight hard or to make a lot of effort. So in the reading, I said I felt guilty for giving up on someone struggling with a drug addiction. So here we see struggle with a problem, and we can also struggle to plus a verb, to do something. Like in the second example, it says, English is a struggle for me. That is a struggle as a noun, a countable noun, like a fight. But the second sentence says, I'm always struggling to find the right words. That means I always have to make a big effort to find the right words. Or in the last example, Geraldo struggled with his math class. Our next word is addiction. This is a countable noun that means a condition that causes you to want something more and more. You can never have enough of it. So this is a specific condition. It can also be used as a non-count noun to mean the action of being addicted to something. The second noun form, addict, is a countable noun, and that is a person. So we don't say an addictor, we say an addict, a drug addict, or a video game addict. So the verb is addict. The stress is on the second syllable. And we say addicted to something. And the adjective forms, we have addictive or addicting. These mean the same things. Those are the cause forms. And addicted is the effect. The adverb isn't used that often. So in the reading, we said he was struggling with a drug addiction. A second example is, this video game is so addictive, I can't stop playing it. And the third example is, my brother is addicted to basketball. He could watch it for hours every day. Our next word is inspiration. Inspiration can be a non-count or countable noun, and it means something or someone that causes others to take positive action. It's usually positive action, or to have an idea. So in the reading, we used inspiration as an adjective, inspirational, which is the cause of inspiration. I said, I want to remember Chris as the inspirational guy who could always make me laugh. That means Chris made me want to do good things. He made me want to take action. In our second example, we have inspire as a transitive verb. My mother inspired me to work hard. And in the last example, we have the countable noun. Serena Williams is an inspiration to so many young tennis players. They all want to be like her. Okay, we're going to end the vocabulary today with 3 phrasal verbs. The first one is let down. Let down means to disappoint someone or to do worse than someone thinks you will do. So this is a transitive, separable phrasal verb. So in the reading, I said, he promised not to let me down. That means he promised not to disappoint me. So of course, because this is separable, we have to put the pronoun me in between the 2 parts of the phrasal verb. Let down can also be put together to form a countable noun that means a disappointment. So in our second example, it says his girlfriend's birthday gift was a real disappointment. It was a real letdown, which means disappointment. And then in the last example, I let my father down when I lied to him. That means I disappointed him. The next phrasal verb is inseparable, but also transitive. And hear from means to get news from someone. So in the reading, I said I didn't hear from him again for almost a year. That means there was no contact. He didn't call me, he didn't email me, I didn't see him at all. The second example says, have you heard from Ju Yan lately? It's been a while. And in the last example, please call me anytime. I'd love to hear from you. That's something we say all the time. I'd love to hear from you. It would be great to hear from you. That means I enjoy getting to talk to you or hearing updates from you. Okay, and lastly, we have the phrase give up on. Give up on is a little complicated, as you can see here. So first we have give up on, which is an inseparable transitive verb phrase. So that means to stop believing in someone or to stop doing something. So in the reading, I said, I felt guilty for giving up on someone struggling with a drug addiction. That means I gave up on Chris. That means I stopped believing that he would be okay. In our second example, give up, just give up as an intransitive phrasal verb means to stop trying. So the example says he didn't think he could pass his chemistry class, so he gave up. That's the past tense. So if you give up, that means you just stop trying. I give up. You shouldn't give up, though. Then we have give up as a transitive separable phrasal verb, which means to stop doing something specific. So it's very similar to give up as an intransitive verb, but you can use it with an object. So you can say he didn't like playing the piano, so he gave it up. Okay, so that's a lot of new vocabulary today. So now to practice, you should write a sentence using each new vocabulary word, or more than one sentence if a word has lots of different forms. You should also try to summarize the week's reading in 1 to 2 sentences. This is harder than it seems. And then there are 2 questions that you can write longer essays or paragraphs on to practice writing longer things and also to practice using the vocabulary some more. The first question is, what do you think of the narrator's decision to give up on her friend? And why do you think that way? And finally, who was someone in your life that is inspirational? Describe how this person inspires you. And this last question is a really great question if you are preparing to go to college or to write essays or to interview for a job, because this is a common question that people ask you during interviews or for college essays. So thanks for joining us today, and I hope you'll join us for speaking lesson number 7, where we can practice using this vocabulary in speech.